Go sleep safely. Go sleep safely. Pie, pie, Siamese pie. Go sleep safe. I'll need the archives. And all the world is good for things. Blah, 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 please. And I can see. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sipping overtime.
Let's enjoy an intermission. You'll find our snack bars.
Let's not do intermission. Let's do mechanical TV.
Fries chasing goals.
They're
Strike
gross.
all the right chords. Powerful.
What the hell am I
delicious,
watching?
Says the Hollywood.
Huh. Oh, you know what that?
Unintended consequence of this meat.
I am alive!
And welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that will bring out your inner Luddite, guaranteed, or your money back. This is going to be a hard show.
Yeah, I know, Ben. You like doing hard shit.
Really
You
hard
like doing
show.
hard shows.
Based on a viewer's suggestion,
Bye.
the initial idea was going to be to look into a freak weather occurrence that briefly got British TV onto American shores. And I don't
Actual
mean
amateur
imported
footage.
programming. I mean the actual British signal made it all the way to New York briefly in late 1938, which led to questions like, they had TV already in 1938? That led to a bunch of other discoveries, and finally to the realization that we talk a lot about TV around here, but not necessarily the history. And so today we discuss television prehistory, or prehistoric television, to be cute. Now, I have no scientific background or skill, which makes it a lot harder for me to discuss this. And if that's not enough, when we're not dealing with the science, we're dealing with the Nazis. You heard me. Stick with me, gang. Nearly this entire episode is going to consist of our all-time most difficult history lesson. In the 1840s, Scottish inventor Alexander Bain came up with a distant forerunner to the fax machine, in this case allowing images to be transmitted telegraphically, pulse-based. It was a piece of crap, but significant nonetheless. In the 1880s, German inventor Paul Nipkow came up with a disc-based system that would be hooked up telegraphically as well. The disc would be a piece of metal or cardboard, just something reasonably sturdy. On the, for example, metal disc, there were a series of, say, 30 strategically placed holes going around the disc. Each one of these holes represents a line, as in a line of image resolution. When the disc would rotate at, say, 750 RPMs, it created the illusion of an image being very quickly drawn out, line by line. In this case, we are looking at 30 lines of vertical resolution. Nipkow gave up on his idea rather quickly, but in the 1920s, thanks to the rise of the radio, there was this sudden, belated race to perfect Nipkow's idea, now known as the mechanical television. In 1925, American inventor Charles Francis Jenkins publicly demonstrated his version of the mechanical television, this time with picture and sound. But the best and longest-lasting variation of this invention was by the design of Scottish inventor John Logie Baird. Baird demonstrated his television in January of 1926. This version had a bandwidth of 30 lines. Baird's system of transmission was based around a film intermediate. In other words, the program would be properly filmed on top of a transmitter truck. The unprocessed film would then run down into the, by necessity, dark truck, be immediately processed, then scanned by a quote-unquote flying spot scanner. Remember the Nipco disc concept? Kind of like that. And finally transmitted via cable. What a pain in the ass. Speaking of a pain in the ass, photocells in those days were woefully weak. It was these photocells that were the main part of the image scanning process. As a result, no light could be any stronger than what the photocells gave off, meaning that if the film intermediate system was not used, which it often wasn't, the show had to be done in near total darkness. Plus, the poor definition of the final picture forced performers to wear the most utterly bizarre makeup you've ever seen. Otherwise, they'd just be a blob on the quote-unquote screen. The BBC adopted the 30-line Baird broadcast standard in 1934, becoming the first significant TV broadcasters. And while Baird continually improved on the image resolution of its television, and photocell technology was finally coming up to par as well, the invention of the electronic television squashed Baird's systems by 1937. Unfortunately, the film intermediate system was rarely used, and all the film footage shot by the BBC during this time period was melted down during World War II to recover the silver. And now it's time for things you can do with magnetic tape. These days, with all the hipster talk about the return of the audio cassette, I think it might be a good idea to give a little rundown of less obvious uses for this stuff, as it pertains to video. In the mid-1970s in Australia, there was a small group of engineering students that devised a method of capturing Baird-style 32-line narrowband images with 2-track open-reel audio tape. In a dark room with the help of a homebrew cathode ray tube-based flying spot scanner, these guys were able to record image and sound onto audio tape. One track for audio, the other for video. Once recorded, the data would be fed into an oscilloscope or a homemade Nipco disc for playback. For what it's worth, narrowband TV can also be broadcast via shortwave radio.
Huh. So I could be on TV if I wanted to. I just need a couple. So I need an antenna.
In 1987, toy manufacturer Fisher-Price introduced the PXL 2000. The PXL 2000 recorded picture and sound onto standard audio cassettes. The image and sound were captured by running the tape at around 16 inches per second, about 9 times faster than the 1 7/8 inches per second usually used for standard audio cassettes. This is because anything slower would be too prone to dropouts. Other than that, this toy was fairly similar to the Australian open reel.
I had one of those. They're pretty cool, but I don't think it worked well. If you had one back in the 80s and brought it today, it wouldn't have no damage because you had You're right about
Lastly,
2 of them.
Commodore 64 users could download their computer data, including video games, onto audio cassettes. This was done with the help of the dataset peripheral. The dataset would capture data as audio, which you could feed back into the computer to retrieve your files. If you play it as standard audio, it sounds a bit like an old dial-up modem. Thank you for joining us for today's Things You Can Do with Magnetic Tape.
Nazis, who cares about the Nazis? I don't care about the Nazis.
Let's talk about a certain unintended
Nazis.
consequence of this newfangled television thing. In the all-time least shocking turn of events, that propaganda machine known as the Nazi Party, some party, readily embraced the idea of television as a means of alternately distracting and indoctrinating the German people prior to and during World War II. The Paul Nipko television station was introduced in public viewing rooms during the Third Reich, and it's a doozy. For the record, Paul Nipko, though still alive and living in Germany during World War II, had no involvement with the TV network that bore his name. It was just named after him, probably because of his status as a German television pioneer. In spite of German television being electronic as opposed to mechanical, the Nazis almost always used the Baird Film Intermediate System. The upshot of this is that the filmed footage, which was put into storage after airing, remains the most plentiful source of 1930s television.
Wow.
Now, it was hard to decide whether or not I actually wanted to use some of this footage. I really don't like giving a platform to what is by and large Nazi propaganda. But I also believe in history and learning from the successes and especially the failures of the past. So here are a few brief, unaccompanied excerpts from the Paul Nipkow television station.
My coffee soon.
Mal wieder über die Musik zu sprechen. Ich freue mich eigentlich, dass es heute alles so
36.
wunderbar intakt geht, nicht wahr? Wenn es auch hier und da immer noch so etliche Querpfeifer bei uns gibt. Und vielleicht auch mal solche, die gerne
Guys
mal
are so-
wieder die Zentrummel rühren möchten. Sogenannte Devisenmusikanten, nicht wahr? Da machen wir wenig Federleben. Die kommen
Ooh,
wieder
I'm gonna
weiter
poop
und
that bit my ass right now.
in ein Konzertlager,
Asp.
wo man ihnen dann so
Asp.
Flöten
Asp,
beibringt,
asp, asp,
wie
asp.
sie sich an eine
Asp.
taktvolle
Asp,
Mitarbeit
asp.
gewöhnen.
Hier habe ich
Asp.
noch ein Tasterzirkel,
Asp.
damit die Schädelmaße aufgenommen werden. Und wie alt bist du?
13 Jahre.
13, danke schön. Stell dich mal bitte so rum und die Hacken zusammen. Die Jochbogen breiter.
Sass.
12,4.
Hosen und Pille meistern das Schicksal. Das ist die Losung unserer Schwerkriegsbeschädigten. Sie hatten durchlaufen eine Hindernisbahn, 100 Meter lang, mit schweren Hindernissen. Im Anfang ein Irrgarten, der schnelles Reaktionsvermögen verlangt. Zu dem Sprung gehört Mut. Wehe, wer hier hängen bleibt. Wie die Wiese.
Nicht wahr, es geht doch ganz nicht.
Ja, fabelhaft.
Das hätte ich mir nie träumen lassen. Als ich schwer verwundet in Russland da, gab ich nur einmal tanzen hören.
Haben Sie früher sehr gerne
Nein, ich habe noch nie getanzt. Ich habe es jetzt erst als Amputierter gelernt.
Sie haben doch beide Beine abgeschnitten.
Ja,
Doch macht es Ihnen Freude.
das Leben ist so schön.
As we all know, World War II